We're going to take a look at Act 4, Scene 1, which is really I think where this conflict between abstract concepts and reality that is one of the major, well, probably I would say the major focus of the play, I think takes on another level and becomes the heart of the tragedy, which is why the title at the top of this resource says A Tragedy of Vision, the ocular proof and the corrosion of faith in vision itself. What we see in this particular scene, I think, is not only the degradation of faith in abstract concepts, but also the construction of sensory reality in a way that reveals that is just as unreliable as the abstract conceptions that Othello is committed to. So what we see in this particular scene is both, the lenses through which Othello interprets life as being unreliable and faulty and liable to manipulation, but also then a version of frank, honest reality through the senses that is, again, another flawed vision of seeing the world. And what we then get is this kind of tragic understanding of vision itself, that neither way offers this kind of irrefutable evidence for truth and reality, and that in all different sorts of ways, vision is compromised. So we start in familiar territory with Iago provoking Othello and provoking his kind of volatile emotional state. So we're looking, first of all, at lines 2 to 4, which are these. This begins with Othello and Iago at the beginning of the scene having this exchange. So it starts kind of in medias res, this scene. It's straight in the middle of the action with very little kind of, explanation of what's going on. Iago says, "Will you think so? Think so, Iago?" "What? To kiss in private," Iago says. "An unauthorized kiss. Or to be naked with her friend in bed an hour or more, not meaning any harm." So the very first suggestion here is Iago asking questions here to kiss in private that refocuses this discussion straight away on the suspicions that ended the previous scene. So we've got this sort of 3-scene sprawl of suspicion that Iago is cultivating in Othello. And we begin as we've ended the previous scenes. Unauthorized in this particular context means, illicit. It's not approved from a moral vantage point. So that it's a sort of illicit or immoral or unvirtuous behavior. Iago then casually offers this as a suggestion. To be naked with her friend in bed an hour or more, not meaning any harm. This is quite literally, well, what happens if she's just in bed with her friend naked, but they're not doing anything? He's very deliberately invoking an implausible suggestion. This is an implausible suggestion for 2 grown adults to be lying in bed with no clothes on and be doing nothing other than just, having a sleep and a cuddle. This implausible suggestion is deliberately designed to provoke Othello's paranoia. Of course they're not going to do that. And of course this suggestion that he opens this scene with is designed to perpetuate this sense of emotional volatility and the inclination to imagine these kind of sexual scenes that Iago keeps sort of drip-feeding Othello throughout these different scenes. And this is completely implausible. And Othello reacts to this with complete kind of dismissal. He says, "Naked in bed, Iago, and not mean harm, it is hypocrisy against the devil. They that mean virtuously and yet do so, the devil their virtue tempts, and they tempt heaven." So this is quite cryptic, the language that he uses there, and there's a sense of incredulity that Othello communicates in these lines. Of course, this is complete rubbish. Lying in bed naked and not mean harm. Of course they do. It's absolutely certain that you wouldn't lie in bed with an adult and not mean to do something sinful. And then when he says it's hypocrisy against the devil, what he's talking about here is being sinful whilst appearing to do good. It's hypocrisy against the devil because you are appearing to be good whilst carrying out sinful behavior. So we've got, again, that notion of deception that Othello is even locating in this act that is not really that deceptive. People getting in bed with their clothes off with each other is not a particularly deceptive act, but Othello is seeing it as one. Even in that situation, it is possible to see the behavior as something that you are understanding with reference to virtue. Even in that scenario, he clings on to the concept of virtue and says, "Oh, well, it would be deceptive." Well, clearly it's worse than that. It's not really deceptive, is it? There's nothing deceptive about it. So there's this sort of frank sexuality that still Othello is using this kind of virtuous language, as you see here, to make sense of. And he develops this when he says, they that mean virtuously and yet do so. They that supposedly have virtuous intent and yet get in bed with each other with their clothes off, tempt the devil with their virtue. Their virtue tempts the devil, is what he means when he says the devil their virtue tempts. So with this supposed virtue, they actually tempt sin. And then because of that, they tempt heaven. And what he means by that is kind of God's judgment. They tempt the judgment of God. So there's, again, when you look, I think the natural inclination here when you read this is to find this confusing. And I think it is confusing for a very good reason, is that the way that Othello is trying to make sense of this suggestion is kind of ludicrous. You know, using and repeating the word virtue and temptation and heaven shows us that he's trying to sort of, it's almost like he's glorifying the mundane sexuality that Iago is providing him with these bold, abstract concepts. That somehow, you know, he cannot give up this lens of salvation and theology. He has to look at these things through those lenses, otherwise he doesn't know how to interpret the world. But Iago's suggestion is obviously playful and not particularly serious. You know, in one respect, it's deliberately sort of provocative. You know, you imagine your friend saying this, oh, well, he was naked in bed with her for an hour or more, but they didn't mean any harm. You know, everyone would react to that, I think, with an instinctive sense of it being ludicrous. And Othello doesn't. He reacts to it and justifies it with this sort of theological argument that shows us again that he's using the wrong interpretative tools to understand reality. He's still looking at something that almost like a complex ethical dilemma that just doesn't merit that kind of treatment. It's not serious enough to warrant that type of thinking. A little further into this, over the page, Iago carries on and says, so they do nothing. 'Tis a venial slip. If I give my wife a handkerchief, what then? Why then? 'Tis hers, my lord, and being hers, she may, I think, bestow it on any man. So one of the most important things here is this phrase, a venial slip, which he uses here, that deliberately invokes theological categories. Venial sins are minor sins, sins that are, you know, they're not the kind of the central ones that prevent damnation. They are forgivable. It's possible for you to be redeemed from these. So he notices the language that Othello is using. He notices this theological language that Othello uses in the previous lines, takes it himself, and then uses it to dismiss the severity of the sexual scenario that he describes. So he recognizes that Othello is using the language of theology to make sense of this sort of ludicrous, half-comic suggestion that he makes, borrows that language and uses it then to dismiss what he suggested as something serious. You know, venial sins are the minor ones. What he then does, he very, very quickly juxtaposes these suggestions with his first mention of what we call in this play the ocular proof, the tangible physical evidence that Desdemona has done something wrong. Of course, this tangible, concrete evidence is purely circumstantial. That's the great irony of this supposed concrete evidence, and the way that it undermines the tragedy of vision is that the real evidence, so to speak, is also unreliable and an illusion. But if I give my wife a handkerchief, you know, he immediately segues from these religious concepts to, well, okay, what about this actual concrete proof then? If we stop using these abstractions to make sense of this, well, what about an actual symbol? What about a real physical object then that we can use to make sense of whether or not this is right or wrong or whether it's happened? So those lines, I think, juxtapose abstraction with supposedly concrete truth. That it's not really concrete truth, but it's what he has led Othello to believe is concrete truth. Further down, he says, what then? Why then? 'Tis hers, my lord, and being hers, she may, I think, bestow it on any man. Quite clearly, this is supposed to give us a sense of the freedom with which someone could just treat this supposedly menial object, obviously it being a symbol of chastity and sexuality on one level. Of course, she can just hand this handkerchief around however she pleases. This is Iago's suggestion. Obviously, deliberately provoking this sense of Desdemona's promiscuity before Othello sees the handkerchief. So he's already shaped the scenario that he later goes on to show Othello. Othello hasn't yet seen this handkerchief in the circumstances that leads him to believe this truthfully. He sees the ocular proof later on in this play, but Iago is already carving out the means for him to interpret reality. So even when he is looking at something with his two eyes, Iago has already shaped the way that he sees it. He's already constructed that reality. Yeah, he's got it, and later on in the scene, it manages to find its way into Othello's vision in a way that makes him believe that it is ocular proof of Desdemona's infidelity. Othello responds, again, with his abstractions. She is protectress of her honor too. May she give that? Can she just hand away this abstract concept of honor? Remember the connection between that word and honesty. Can she just give away her honor in the same way that she could give away her handkerchief? This is where Othello's commitment to these concepts is again evident. And Iago says, her honor is an essence that's not seen. We've got here virtue, a fig. These types of statements that Iago makes throughout the play to attack these abstract conceptions. Her honor is an essence that's not seen. They have it very oft that have it not. Again, mirrors lots of those phrases he's used throughout the play that talks about reputation and virtue as being things that are intangible and therefore not unreliable. They have it oft that have it not. People that supposedly possess honor don't have honesty. He's again manipulating the ambiguity of those words. But for the handkerchief, again, juxtaposes supposedly tangible physical evidence here in the handkerchief with these abstractions that he again overtly dismisses and says are faulty ways of viewing reality. So what he's constructing here through these constant juxtapositions is this sense of, well, this way that you've seen the world, how far has that got you so far? Oh, it's led your wife to cheat on you. Well, what about if I showed you a different way of looking at reality, which is itself engineered? So what we have here is someone looking at the world, being told that the way that he has seen the world for the entirety of his life is unreliable, and then being given an alternative that is just as unreliable. So there's nowhere for Othello to go. There is no way for him to see reality honestly, in the sense of truthful and accurate. A little further down, he says, Iago says, what if I had said I had seen him do you wrong, or heard him say, as knaves be such abroad, who having by their own importunate sue, or voluntary dotage of some mistress, convinced or supplied them, cannot choose, but they must blab. If you were to try and paraphrase this in modern sort of parlance or language, it would be, what if I told you that I have seen him do you wrong, or heard him say, and he doesn't finish the sentence, there be such fools abroad, around the place, who, having by their own kind of inappropriate pursuit of a woman, or their voluntary sort of submission to a woman, convinced or supplied them, seduced or satisfied them sexually, and then can't choose but to tell everyone about it. They can't help themselves. What he's trying to do here is portray Cassio as a braggart, someone who is boasting about his sexual conquests. He said, well, if he has done this, he will 100% have spoken about it. What if I told you I've heard him say something about it? The key thing to note here, though, in these opening lines, which is what we have on point 4 on the handout, his language reveals the circumstantial nature of the evidence. Because first of all, he says, what if I had said, I had seen him do you wrong, or heard him say? We've got, what if I told you that I'd seen him or heard him say? And then he doesn't finish the sentence. He still hasn't yet in his own mind thought clearly about the way to present this evidence to Othello. So you can see from the way that he shifts from, what if I told you what I'd seen, what if I told you what I'd heard him say, and then doesn't finish that sentence. We've got there this suggestion that he hasn't yet worked out how to lie to Othello, and that he's in the process of formulating the lie. And of course, Othello doesn't notice this. He doesn't notice this unfolding in front of him. This convinced or supplied them is also important. These are both sexual puns. You thought we made it 10 minutes without talking about one. Here they are again. Seduced or supplied is quite literally to provide sexual satisfaction. Again, he's constantly weaving these sexual implications into his language so that Othello never loses sight, metaphorical sight, of what is going on behind his back. There is never any loss of focus on the sexual activity that is always going on off stage. You notice that the play opens with that sexual suspicion and that charivari, that desire to disrupt them in the act of consummating their marriage. It never leaves us anywhere. It's constant throughout the play. Because if it's not Othello and Desdemona consummating their marriage, it's Desdemona supposedly doing it with someone else. It's always there. And that's this kind of simmering anxiety that bubbles beneath the surface of everything. And Iago is the one that turns the heat up on that simmering. He never lets anyone forget about the fact that this is all going on in the background. There's dirty sex going on that none of you know about. Don't forget that. That's what really we're talking about. You know, there's that deliberate reminders that are woven into everything that he says. Constant reminders. The fifth one says, it's 32-35 over the page. Again, this is another example of Iago's opportunistic kind of genius for this type of language. Faith that he did, I know not what he did, Iago says. And Othello is confused by this. He says, what? Lie. Othello interrupts him and says, lie with her. And then Iago's response is, with her, on her, whatever you will. So he's very deliberately here, I think, exploiting the instability of the pronouns when he says, we say lie on her when they belie her. That sentence means, well, we say lie on her when someone tells the truth. But what he's deliberately doing is exploiting the ambiguity of those phrases, lie on her, to suggest both someone telling a lie, but also someone sleeping with his wife. So there's, in this line, what he's quite literally forcing Othello to do is to imagine a variety of different sexual positions that Desdemona is adopting with Cassio, with her, on her, whatever you will, whatever you want. This is a kind of Shakespearean Kama Sutra. This is what's going on in these lines, that he is sharing with Othello. By accident, remember, Othello is the one that has accidentally provided him with the impetus for this punning. Because he says, lie with her, on her, whatever you want, whatever you will, whatever you prefer to imagine your own wife doing. You know, this is what I mean by him never letting this escape Othello's mind and his imagination.
Does he let him interrupt him, or is it kind of like improvised?
Does Othello interrupt?
Does Iago let him interrupt him, or did...
I think when Othello says with her, what we've got there is a revelation of his anxiety. Because Othello is interrupting Iago, but then I think what we can read from Iago is this kind of opportunistic verbal dynamism. He is immediately pouncing on an opportunity that Othello has sort of stumbled upon. He's provided this to him without really him seeking it out. And there's again that sense of Iago's opportunistic creative genius. It's a weird thing to say with someone about someone in such a compromised moral context, but he has the type of verbal genius that we would associate with the very best stand-up comedians. You know, they respond instinctively to what we'd call the polyvalency of language, the multiple connotations of particular phrases and words, and develop those suggestions. And Iago does that just as well as any really good stand-up comedian. He's constantly doing it. The phrase fulsome, which is highlighted here, is where Othello responds to this sexual suggestion that Iago has made to him. Lie with her, lie on her. We say lie on her when they belie her. Lie with her. You can hear Othello's psychological degeneration in lines like this, and they gradually increase in frequency as we move throughout the scene. Fulsome has a very deliberate connotation of sort of sexual fertility, and it means rank in the literal sense of sheep being in heat, being, at that time of the month when they are fertile. The word rank, the word fulsome means sheep that are receptive to fertility. So you can see here, again, there's never far away as this sort of anxiety about bestiality, making sense of lust through animal imagery, savage behavior. And that when we think about that category, categorizing sexuality and the impulses of the body as something, uncivilized and as a violent impulse, what it's telling us is the way that Othello has been taught to internalize that binary of mistrusting his own sexuality because it is further evidence of his racial savagery. There's another reason why he is coaxed into being distant from his own sexual impulses, because it is further evidence he has been convinced that he is secretly a savage barbarian. His impulsive sexuality is another thing that he must fight to kind of repress. And that's why every time he gains this sense of paranoia, you see these slippages that reveal the way that he envisions sexuality as something animalistic and something barbaric and degenerate.
You also refer to like the black and white imagery.
Yeah, of course. That there is this suggestion there of something that's seen as a symbol of innocence, and that here is at its kind of its peak taint. It's the black sheep, so to speak, and then obviously that connects to his own racial identity. There's an awful lot in that exchange, and I'd say that this is generally characteristic of the play as you start to read it. The further and further you go in the text, the more meaning is being produced with the fewer amount of words. There's an awful lot to analyze there, and very simple semantics. The words themselves in those phrases are not that complex, but it's manipulating the multiple meanings of quite everyday verbiage of language. Now, this section at the bottom of Othello's speech, you can see from some of the erratic nature of his thought in these lines. Handkerchief, confession, handkerchief, to confess and be hanged for his labour. He's talking about Cassio here, and his labour quite literally means his sexuality and his sexual activity. First to be hanged and then to confess. I tremble at it. And these last lines, nature would not invest herself in such shadowing passion without some instruction. It is not words that shake me thus. And one of the ways to read this is that he's talking here about himself. That my own inclination, my natural impulses would not invest themselves in such a false passion. My feelings would not be so intense without there being some tangible reason for this. And he's using now his emotional volatility as the basis or the justification for his suspicions. So the emotional volatility that Iago has created is now being used in Othello's mind as the justification for being suspicious towards Desdemona, which is exactly what Iago wants. That's why he says nature would not invest herself in such shadowing passion without some instruction. I can't be feeling this way without there being some sort of logical merit to it. So he's now, his feelings are what he is using here as the justification for the suspicion. Well, and that's something untrustworthy, certainly, because we've seen how easy it is to conjure feelings out of nothing in this play. We can manipulate them, we can create them through circumstantial evidence. And so what we have here then is that this is so directly playing into Iago's hands, and it's also the beginning of the way that Othello's behaviour becomes the self-fulfilling prophecy of the racial prejudices that he experiences. That he becomes this sort of illogical, uncivilized barbarian that can't tame his passions and that can't tame his feelings. And that loss of control is what ends up being the kind of clinching evidence that everyone was right about him all along. He was a fake Christian, and he was this savage barbarian that was only acting the part of a civilized humanity. But remember, Iago has created this emotional background for that degeneration to take place. And that's why he says, it is not words that shakes me thus. It is not simply language that has destroyed my sense of control over my behavior. But of course, it is precisely that. The poison that Iago pours in his ear is language. Language is what has created this emotional state that he is now himself identifying as the basis for his suspicion of his wife. So language and its provocation of feelings are the tools that Iago has used to create the emotional state that is now being defended by Othello as the basis, the logical basis for his suspicion. And Iago knows this. He falls over at the end of this. Noses, ears, and lips. Is it possible? There's all different body parts here in his imagination. You can see the degeneration of his mind. Often nose in this era is a pun on the word penis as well. So there's a noses, ears, and lips as a very kind of genitalia heavy set of body parts that he is just kind of throwing out there into the ether. Is it possible? Confess, handkerchief, or devil. You can see there's no logical, there's no ordering behind his thoughts here. We've now just got this kind of succession of images that appear to be undigested in rational thought. And you can see the loss of that supposedly cool rational function that Othello is famous for, and that allows him to convince everyone that he isn't some kind of savage barbarian. Without that rational function, his performance of the role of a civilized Christian is exposed as a sham in the eyes of the Venetians. So this destruction of his rational capacities that Iago has carried out also destroys the identity that Othello has carved out for himself as a rational Christian and as an integral part of Venice's social fabric. And Iago knows this. You can hear the smug self-satisfaction in these lines. Work on, my medicine, work. He's talking now about the poison that he has poured in his ear. Remember, he's talking about language when he uses that metaphor. Thus, credulous fools are caught, and many worthy and chaste dames even thus. All guiltless meet reproach. And this is, I think, where, on the handout, point 7, this is where he really reveals his honest attitude towards honesty. And what I mean by that is he reveals his own truthful feelings towards honor. So here he says, credulous fools, people who are willing to believe the things that they see, are caught. And again, it's that language of that extended metaphor of the spider trap that he constantly uses, the spider web that crops up 3-4 times in the play, catching people out, trapping them in a vision of reality. Believing fools are caught in this metaphorical spider web. And many worthy and chaste dames even thus, even these people that are committed to abstractions such as worth and reputation and chastity and virtue. I get those ones too. All of them guiltless, but they meet reproach. So none of them have done anything wrong, and yet they manage to be caught in my manipulative web. So what we have there is this is the first time he has openly, I think, declared the way in which he sees his own attitude towards honor, is that it provides me with the material to manipulate people. I can catch many worthy and chaste, virtuous dames who are all guiltless, but because of these abstractions, I'm able to manipulate them. So there's a sort of confessional quality to this, and I think that's brought about by the fact that Othello falls on the floor, and the visual nature of this scene is giving us an inclination of the power hierarchy in this, and the way that at the end of Act 3, Scene 3, it shifts as well. We have that moment where Othello kneels down, and Iago is kind of, always what I think about when I see that scene is that kind of part of The Lion King where Scar is like climbing that little mountain and he's singing that song, and it's like this kind of the ascent of evil through Disney. But at that moment in time, he visually is taking on that position of power and authority, and I think it's deliberately kind of visually invoked in the theatre here, is this sense of Iago kind of standing tall and feeling confident enough to just declare his manipulative approach as Othello kind of crumbles. And you can see the way he crumbles just from the sheer sort of proliferation of these tiny sentences that don't follow a logical train of thought, and this sort of exclamations and weird punctuation that he uses throughout this. Further to this, over the page, 53, 54, this is where Cassio turns up. So Cassio turns up now, perfect timing. Iago says, "My lord has fallen into an epilepsy. Othello is off his head." And Cassio says, maybe you should look after him. I think he says, rub him about the temples. I think that's the phrase he uses. Rub him about the temples. Maybe you should give him a quick head massage. He looks troubled. So Cassio tries to be nice to Othello. But of course, Othello is off his head and doesn't realize what's happening. And Iago says, "The lethargy must have his quiet course. Let the madness take its own course. Let the insanity follow its own path. If not, he foams at mouth and by breaks out to savage madness. And here it is. Here is Iago articulating the way in which he has managed to get Othello to fulfill his prejudices. He's foaming at the mouth. He's a wild, uncivilized barbarian. Look at him. He's lost control of himself. He's breaking out into savage madness. What we see, though, in these lines and others like them that follow is this idea that maybe his prejudices are a type of prophecy. Not necessarily the play defending prejudices and saying that that's morally upstanding to see prejudice as a type of prophecy. Because as soon as we say something's prophetic, it forecasts the future, we kind of value it in some respect. You don't often hear people using the word prophetic as a negative adjective. So to say someone that has a vision into the future and then use it as a way of criticizing him is unusual. But quite literally here, Iago's own and everyone else's, Brabantios and all of the other kind of white Christian Venetians, that prejudice that they bring to Othello's identity at the beginning of the play here appears to be coming true. But of course, what we notice about this is Iago's interpretation of what he's seeing. There's nothing about Othello's behavior that necessitates this description. But Iago seems to be confirming everyone's suspicions. Oh, look, the crazy black man now suddenly is foaming at the mouth and behaving like a savage barbarian. Look at this reality that everyone knew was going to happen all along. So there's a fundamental sense of his racism here appearing like a prophecy. But of course, the great dramatic irony is that we know that what we're seeing is precisely not that vision of reality. This isn't that Othello is somehow degenerated into a savage barbarian. He has been manipulated into it by those prejudices. So we see the power of these prejudices, not necessarily because they get proved right and accurate by nature, but they construct a vision of reality that the play shows as being fulfilled. It's another lens to view the world through. And the sad one is that this one is the one that actually occurs. Prejudice dominates tangible proof, dominates abstractions. Just to rub salt in the wound, as Cassio leaves, he starts to make fun of Othello as well. How is it, General? Have you not hurt your head? Othello cottons on to the fact that he is mocking him. Dost thou mock me? I mock you? No, by heaven. Would you bear your fortune like a man? So not only is he now mocking him, he's now accusing him of losing his masculinity. And Othello is aware of this. A horned man's a monster and a beast. When he says horned man, he means a cuckold, someone that has been cheated on by his wife. The cuckold's horns are the kind of Renaissance, Elizabethan symbol of being cheated on by your wife. And Iago says, there's many a beast then in a populous city and many a civil monster. He uses these paradoxes and oxymorons to construct this sense of the binaries of civilization. So simply here, he starts to make fun of him. Have you hurt your head? Of course I haven't hurt my head. You've just driven me insane. Why are you asking me that as if that's a reasonable question? That would be my reply, but Othello just says, dost thou mock me? He denies this and then just says, well, I wouldn't mock you if you would only bear your fortune like a man, you pansy, i.e. strap on a pair, get control over your feelings, stop being so feeble. So he's managing to undermine his sense of masculinity at the same time as making him feel inferior racially and vulnerable and jealous and suspicious. Masculinity is now being added into this poisonous mix that he creates for him. And Othello immediately resorts to this sort of self-effacing mode that he's so familiar with. A horned man's a monster and a beast. Identifying himself on that monstrous side of the civilized savage binary. I know that I'm on the savage side. I am a horned man. I am a cuckold. And therefore I am both monstrous and beastly. Iago simply says, well, there's many a beast then in a populous city. Populous city being a sort of visual symbol of civilization, like Venice. And a beast being this animalistic way of invoking savagery. And many a civil monster. The categories themselves are unreliable. They are, again, abstractions that can be manipulated, because what is Iago at this moment if not a civil monster? This is a description of him. But then what we see there is that those categories that he has invoked all the way through the play, and that Othello has internalized. He knows that the way that everyone sees him is as a savage, and that his participation in the other side of the equation is just a performance. Iago's invoking all these binaries with his language throughout this part in order to manipulate Othello. He's using those categories that he knows that Othello has internalized to provoke him, to manipulate him, and to trigger that sense of inadequacy that he knows he can exploit because of Othello's racial identity. It gets worse. He then manages to make Othello feel paranoid about everything that he holds dear and familiar. He says, "Good sir, be a man." Again, come on, hold it together. Keep your shit together, mate. You know, hold your feelings inside. "Think every bearded fellow that's but yoked may draw with you. Every mature man that is yoked," this is the way he describes marriage, like an ox yoked to a cart. It's a burden. It's not something you do voluntarily. "May draw with you." He may feel the same way as you. There's millions now alive that nightly lie in those unproper beds. There's millions of people. And bear in mind that the world population is significantly smaller at this period of time. Millions is basically like now saying billions. There's billions of people alive that lie in those unproper beds, morally tainted beds that have been corrupted by promiscuity and a failure to be virtuous, which they dare swear are peculiar. Peculiar means unique, which are their own. They are their own territory. Oh, you know, millions of people are out there saying, "This is just my bed. This is my wife. I take possession over this." But they're improper. They have been tainted and they just don't know about it. Your case is better than this. "Oh, 'tis the spite of hell, the fiend's arch mock, to lip a wanton in a secure couch, to kiss a prostitute in a bed that you believe is inviolable." The delusion is what is the arch mock that he's talking about here. Not knowing that it's happening. Not that it's occurring, but the lack of awareness in its reality. "And to suppose her chaste. No, let me know, and knowing what I am, I know what shall be." And there's a sort of a fairly grim suggestion of doom, I think, in his final lines that, again, tells us about the direction of the plot. "No, let me know. Let me have the truth. I don't want to be tricked. I don't want to be deluded. And knowing what I am," I think the missing word that you can almost imagine here is, "I know what she shall be." And if we bear in mind what happens in this plot, Othello kills her. He's already feeding this idea to him here. Knowing what I am, knowing that I am a cuckold, that gives me clear resolution about what shall happen to her.
That's not his goal, is it?
Not necessarily, but he wants a catastrophic fate to befall Othello. It doesn't really matter what form that takes. So there is, I think, that at least the deliberate attempt to punish Desdemona, because he knows Desdemona doesn't deserve the punishment, and that somehow then it will result in Othello's downfall in whatever format that takes. But when we know that Othello's murder of Desdemona comes from his jealousy and his sense of inadequacy, knowing what I am, I know what she shall be, is dead. She shall be dead out of revenge for having violated my sense of integrity and virtue and morality. Immediately after providing him with this gruesome idea, "Confine yourself but in a patient list. Just hold it together, will you? You know, I've managed to feed you the idea now that you are so jealous that you would willingly murder your wife, but keep your feelings together at the same time." You know, there's this immediate jumping from this unbelievably treacherous, dangerous idea. Do you remember he says dangerous conceits have their own logic? Here's another one. Jumping from that to this sort of, "Oh, I'm trying to look out for you as a friend, as a man, as a fellow man. Hold yourself together, will you? Stop being so feeble." Well, yeah, he's accusing Othello of being weak. And he does this more. "A passion most unsuiting such a man. Cassio came hither." So he manages to draw those two together. You were being feeble. You weren't being masculine. This passion that he associates with savage barbarian behavior is unsuiting you. It is not befitting a man of your standing and of your rank. So he's again manipulating that sense of inadequacy that Othello has about his position in conflict with his racial identity. Oh, and by the way, Cassio is here. So whilst you were feeling inadequate and insecure and I was taking the mick out of you for being weak, the person who's sleeping with your wife was here and saw you do it. This is exactly what drives Othello. This is the crowning cherry. This sends him doolally. I shifted him away and laid good excuse upon your ecstasy. I got rid of him and made up a good reason for why you were off your head and completely unaware of what was going on. I bade him a non-return and here speak with me, the which he promised. But I did get him to try and promise that he would come back and tell me what he's been up to with your wife. Do but encave yourself. Keep yourself hidden, but also control your feelings. And mark the fleers, the jibes, and notable scorns that dwell in every region of his face. It's telling him how to look at reality. Hide yourself and watch how much he not only admits to, but the fleers and jibes, how scornful and mocking he is of the fact that he is violating, his position, he is sleeping with your wife, and he's doing it in this kind of scornful way. So he's providing, again, the means of interpreting reality. He's providing those to Othello. This is how you should see what is about to occur. Engineering the way to see the action before it takes place. So he's engineering Othello's vision before it actually unfolds. So that Othello, when he sees the conversation that is about to follow, he's already been given what we would call a kind of hermeneutic framework, and a means of interpreting reality, a way of seeing the phenomena unfold that is unreliable. So again, this is his contrast with abstractions that are unreliable. Well, here I'm giving you the ocular proof, but again, it's a fiction. He's created a fictional lens for Othello to see tangible reality through. He has his little verbal trick again. For I will make him tell the tale anew, where, how often, how long ago, and when he hath and is again to cope your wife. You think of this phrase as, I will make him tell us all again where he has slept with your wife, how he sleeps with your wife, how frequently he sleeps with your wife, how long ago he last slept with your wife, and when he has slept with your wife and is again to sleep with your wife. This is what he is suggesting to Othello here. So where he's provided him with that kind of implicit Kama Sutra earlier on in the scene, he's now providing him with all the possible details. When he does it, how he does it, what's going on when they do it, when the last time they did it was, when's he going to do it again. He's going to get all of those details out of him. He's going to get all of those details out of him, and you will be able to hear it. But at the same time, hold your feelings together. Marry patience. God, keep your feelings together, Control yourself. Or I shall say you're all in spleen and nothing of a man. The phrase in spleen is again important here because it means bestial passion, animalistic impulse. If you can't control your feelings whilst this man is giving you all of the grim, gory details about how he's sleeping with and seducing your wife, you're a savage barbarian. So he's managing to manipulate a sense of sexual inadequacy and posit it as an opposite to the way that he identifies himself. So if you allow your natural impulses of jealousy and suspicion to take reign, you're being a barbarian. You're fulfilling everyone else's racial prejudice. You are acting out everyone else's prejudice. So Othello is left with nowhere to go. Where does he go here? He controls his feelings and kills the natural instincts that I think any person would have in this scenario, or he fulfills everyone's prejudices against his racial identity.
Is there a reading that considers the relationship between Cassio and Desdemona as actually reality?
Not really, because what we have in this play is so heavily emphasized that Iago's manipulation is the driver of the entire narrative. And that for it to mean what it does, we have to accept that it's not real. We have to accept that the vision of reality that he conjures is unreliable and not realistic. Because there would be no basis then for all of those soliloquies, all of this kind of thinking. It's his mind, it's Iago's mind that we get the most detail, the most depiction, the most kind of performance of. The internal qualities of his mind is what we get. We don't get tons of the internal qualities of anyone else's. The female characters actually towards the end, we get honest revelations from them. But in terms of the male characters, there's not an awful lot. And Iago manages to work out the best ways of preventing Othello from dealing with his own feelings realistically. I mean, this is an age-old trick, and you'll see this work now. This last sentence, "You're nothing of a man. You're a girl." This is what he ends on. Of course. If you've ever seen almost every single man I know, if you do this to them, they are the easiest people to manipulate in the entire world, and myself included in this. This is how you get people to do it. You provoke their sense of, you emasculate them. You take away their ridiculous, primitive sense of masculinity, and by doing so, they're putty in your hands. They're the easiest people to manipulate ever. And he says, "I will be found most cunning in my patience, but dost thou hear, most bloody." So he is tired now of all these insinuations against his masculinity and against his character. Iago knows this. It's the easiest way. If you don't jump off that bridge, you're a wuss. If you don't drink that thing, you're a pansy. If you don't do that, you're a wimp, you're a girl, you're a this, you're a that. It's the quickest way, usually, to get any male to do absolutely anything. Tell them that they're a girl and watch them dance to the tune that you want to play. It's primitive and it's whatever. I honestly don't know why it happens, but it does, and you'll see it, and you'll see it hundreds of times. Yeah, well, this type of thing, it has to be something particularly where someone's social identity is at stake. Someone's social identity has to be at stake, and there's loads of psychological evidence that has proven this to be true. And I'll tell you about this really famous study of skateboarders and their risk-taking. They did this huge psychological case study of male skateboarders trying tricks, basically, with no one watching. And then they put a couple of pretty girls at the side of the skate park and watched what they did with the skateboards. And the risk-taking inclinations literally drive through the ceiling. They treble or something along those lines. Without telling them, then no one said, "Hey, by the way, we're going to put these attractive girls here to watch you skateboard." And this happens all the time. I've done this. I was the only person in my school ever to be sent off in a rugby match. And I'm not that way. There were significantly lots of other people more likely to that happen. What happened? My girlfriend was watching someone punch me in the face. I punched them back. I would never have done that in a million years. And it's precisely this. It's this habit that you can see here. You are nothing of a man. So after all of these different suggestions, the one that gets him really, the final clincher is emasculation. He cannot handle the idea that he is emasculated. Remember what his job is. He is a military commander. And if he's left without his masculinity, that really is the straw that breaks the camel's back. It is the final thing that is divested of him, that is taken from him, and that he can't tolerate that. That is the final straw. And when he says, "I will be most cunning in my patience," he's mirroring Iago. He's immediately becoming like Iago. But I will be most bloody in it. So what he manages to do in this particular line is, I think, Iago is drawing again out of him this savagery that he obviously fulfills in the culminating actions of the play itself. That he makes a commitment to fulfill the prejudices. I'm going to be bloody and violent and savage in my patience. So he's still clinging on to that idea that it's somehow a product of his rationalism, his rational Western white Christian thinking. But it's an expression of his violent savagery. So Iago's managed to get him confused about those identities. He's managed to create that sense of cognitive dissonance. I don't know now what the hell I am. I've lost track of who I am. And you'll often see critical readings of Othello as a divided being. And here's where you see it most clearly in this scene. Cassio comes back. And Iago, in between, tells us actually what he's about to do. Now will I question Cassio of Bianca. Bianca is a prostitute, ironically named White. Think about the connotations of those particular conventions of naming, that the prostitute in this play is white. And all of the colour symbolism that we've associated with that particular colour in this play, that virtue and chastity mean nothing. The prostitute is the one that is sinless. Here we've got a kind of literal suggestion of that thematic significance of the unreliability of abstract concepts like chastity and virtue. I'm going to talk to Cassio about Bianca, a housewife that by selling her desires buys herself bread and clothes. By selling her desires, she wants it, is what he's effectively saying. By selling the thing that she wants, as if she loves sleeping with random men for money. Buys herself bread and clothes. She puts herself, she puts a roof over her head and keeps herself fed. It is a creature that dotes on Cassio. Not a human being, it is a creature. It is not a human being, it is an animal. As 'tis the strumpet's plague to beguile many and be beguiled by one. It is the prostitute's curse to beguile hundreds of men. Poor innocent men that are beguiled of their virtue by tempting prostitutes, and herself fall in love with one of those people that she has tried to beguile. He, when he hears of her, cannot refrain from the excess of laughter. Here he comes. So, I'm going to get Cassio to talk about Bianca and get Othello to believe that he's actually talking about Desdemona. I've got a prostitute to stand in for Desdemona. We think about those visions of femininity, both of them unreliable. The embodiment of vice and this artificial embodiment of virtue, Desdemona, this kind of this boundless, virtuous woman, and then this supposed, embodiment of vice. The one that is the embodiment of vice is the one with the name that means white. The categories are conflated, inverted, turned upside down, bent out of shape so that we don't know what the hell we're looking at and we're supposed to be disoriented and confused. As he shall smile, Othello shall go mad. As Cassio shall smile, thinking about this prostitute that is obsessed with him, Othello will be driven crazy because he's going to think that he's talking about his wife. And his unbookish jealousy must construe poor Cassio's smiles, gestures, and light behaviour quite in the wrong. His unbookish jealousy. Look at this. This is this phrase that is the opposite of when he describes Desdemona as a super subtle Venetian. He hasn't learned the way in which people are deceptive and manipulative because he is not white and Christian. He is a black man. He is a racial outsider and therefore cannot understand the true manipulative extent of Western civilization. He has unbookish jealousy. He is dominated by his impulses and his instincts because he is a black man. So there's again, his racism is only a little bit further away than his odd sexual paranoia and sexual anxiety that drives all those puns throughout the play. That the racism is only one little step further away than the sexuality ever. And the misogyny, he's a real catch, this Iago guy.
So he knows that Cassio has slept with Bianca?
Yeah, Cassio is constantly sleeping with a prostitute, which is, again, another way of undermining his position as courtier. Mr. Virtuous, Mr. Honourable is the one that's seeing a prostitute. The prostitute is in love with him. I'm going to now get him to talk about this prostitute in a way that I've already prepared for Othello to see, as if he is talking about actually Desdemona. Of course, and you'll see. Watch what happens. Watch what he gets Cassio to say about her. Iago says, "Ply Desdemona well, and you are sure on it. Now, if this suit lay in Bianca's power, how quickly should you speed?" This is what he says to Cassio, first of all. Ply Desdemona well. This is one of the first things that Othello hears. Ply her, supply her with something. Sexual satisfaction is the connotation. And you are sure on it. You will get your job back in no time if you keep sleeping with Desdemona. No trouble. And Cassio says, "Alas, poor caitiff." Now, this means whore. Poor whore. Othello thinks he's talking about his wife. Othello says, "Look how he laughs already." He's going insane. He's already angry. "I never knew a woman love a man so." This is Iago. "I never knew a woman so obsessed with men. Alas, poor rogue, I think in faith she loves me." This is Othello. Othello thinks he's talking about Desdemona. Now he denies it faintly and laughs it out. Do you hear, Cassio? Now he importunes him to tell it over. Go to, well said, well said. He's cheering Iago on here. Well done, Iago. Get this out of him. She gives it out that you shall marry her. Do you intend it? Desdemona has somehow let it slip that you intend to marry her. Is that true? He laughs in his face. No, absolutely not. She's a prostitute. Why would I want to marry her? Do you triumph, Roman? Do you triumph? He's now talking about, in one way, Iago catching Cassio out. Have you caught him? Do you triumph, Roman? I marry her. What, a customer? He means prostitute. Prithee, bear some charity to my wit. Give me some credit. Give my brain some credit. Do not think it so unwholesome. Don't think me so dirty and tainted that I would marry a prostitute. Ha! 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 And then Othello again. So. They laugh that win. Faith, the cry goes that you shall marry her. Prithee, say true. I am a very villain else, Othello says. Have you scored me well? Cassio says, this is the monkey's own giving out. Monkeys are, again, another one of these bestial suggestions of sort of unrestrained sexual impulse. This is purely sexual desire talking here. I have no intentions of marrying a whore.
But does Cassio see Othello?
Cassio doesn't know that Othello is there. Othello is concealed. He is encaved, as Iago calls it. He's hiding, watching this conversation. I will marry her out of her own love and flattery, not out of my promise. The only way I would marry her is out of her own obsession with me and in order to flatter her desires, not out of anything that I am interested in. Othello aside, Iago beckons me. Now he begins the story. And here is Cassio. This is really the crowning turd in the water pipe, so to speak. She was here even now. She haunts me in every place. She follows me. She's obsessive. I was the other day talking on the sea bank with certain Venetians, and thither comes the bauble, and by this hand falls me thus about the neck. And calling her a bauble is a way of saying that she's just merely a kind of insubstantial decoration. She's like a little thing you would stick on a Christmas tree. She's some kind of insignificant object. And falls me thus about the neck. So here, the suggestion is that he's kind of acting out this kind of flirtatious body language. Oh, look at you, she's kind of all over me. Crying, oh dear Cassio, as it were. His gesture imports it. So Othello is looking at him, carrying out this behaviour and interpreting it. Oh dear Cassio. So hangs and lolls and weeps upon me, so hails and pulls me. Ha ha ha! She is obsessed with me. She's hanging on me. She's kind of lolling around and crying. She is desperately displaying her kind of, deep sexual attraction to him. Now he tells how she plucked him to my chamber. Oh, I see that nose of yours, but not that dog I shall throw it to. Remember what I told you nose means. Well, I must leave her company. Before me, look where she comes. 'Tis such another fichu. Now this means polecat, and at the time, a polecat is supposed to be the embodiment of lust, in the way that he keeps invoking these animals to suggest that Desdemona can't help herself. She is so deeply sexually attracted to me that she throws herself all over me. So not only now is Othello believing that his wife has cheated on him, but that she is the one through her unbound sexual passion driving this relationship that Cassio doesn't even really care about. He's not bothered. He's, whatever, she's a whore, I don't care. He's got this kind of dismissive, macho sort of attitude towards the whole thing. Bianca turns up, though. Here she comes. And she's very normal, actually, by the standards of this play. What do you mean by this haunting of me? Let the devil and this dam haunt you. What did you mean by that same handkerchief you gave me even now? So Bianca has got this handkerchief, and Othello sees it. I was a fine fool to take it. I must take out the work, a likely piece of work, that you should find it in your chamber and not know who left it there. Now, what she means here, what did you mean by that same handkerchief you gave me even now? Why the hell did you give me this thing? I was a fine fool to take it. I was a stupid idiot. I must take out the work. I have to copy the pattern. And then a likely piece of work, she means here. What a load of rubbish. What a lie. So we've got here, in the ambiguity of these phrases, I must take out the work and a likely piece of work. An implicit suggestion that what is seen on the handkerchief and the way that the handkerchief is seen is a manipulative lie. It is a piece of work, what Othello is witnessing right now as we speak. So that remember that the symbols on the handkerchief are of strawberries that are supposed to be this kind of symbolic embodiment of Desdemona's virtue and chastity. The handkerchief is supposed to look like blood-stained marriage sheets. Here, that work, that stitching on the pattern, Bianca implicitly associates with fiction. What you're seeing here is not real. It is a lie. But of course, Othello does not realize this. And the fact that Bianca here says, what did you mean by that same handkerchief you gave me even now? Of course, Othello sees this dialogue but doesn't hear it. If he hears this, he immediately knows that everything that he's seeing is an illusion. Because Bianca has come up to Cassio and said, what the hell are you doing with this handkerchief? You planted it there. So he's a whisker away, Othello, from seeing reality. And seeing a reality that will completely destroy this sort of visual house of cards that Iago has assembled.
Why wouldn't Iago get Bianca in on it?
Because he has no, he I think at the beginning of the play sees her as unimportant and that Cassio will just kind of manipulate her. He doesn't really anticipate her turning up like this and kind of, yeah, and putting the spanner in the works, so to speak. But what we see down here is the great situational irony of this scene is that she is in these lines telling us what a load of rubbish this is. Why the hell did you leave this handkerchief here? All Othello does is see it. By heaven, that should be my handkerchief. And here is the ocular proof that he's been looking for. Of course, it isn't. It's a lie. It's just as much as an illusion as everything else that he thinks he's seeing. But this is what he believes is ocular proof. My handkerchief. There. So this is where the entirety of Iago's plot comes together. He has managed to give Othello the interpretive apparatus to see this scene and understand what's going on and to misinterpret it, to misread the cues. So that what he's seeing now is a completely altered version of reality, but that he is now believing that what he's seeing is real. So he has given up his habit of seeing reality through abstractions and is now purely seeing it as reality. So he believes that he's jumped from one way of seeing reality to the other. Yeah, at this time he can't. The implication is that he can't actually hear what she's saying here, and he can, because the way that the stage is supposed to be set up is so that he's kind of out of earshot of the dialogue, but can only see it. That's what, whenever I've read this scene, I look at this and think, well, why the hell does it matter that this prostitute turns up and has the handkerchief? But that, I think, is supposed to suggest how sort of derailed his mind is. It's come off its hinges. It's quite literally come away from its moorings. There's a sort of strange verbal pun in that. But his way of seeing reality is so detached from what he's familiar with that all he needs is just the handkerchief to be in the hands of someone who he's not expecting it to be. And that is the ocular proof that he's been looking for, the visible, tangible, concrete evidence of Desdemona's manipulation. Now, a little further on, this language of virtue turns up again. Here, there's a series of contrasts that Iago constructs in this dialogue. When Cassio leaves, the first thing Othello says is, "How shall I murder him, Iago?" No messing around, straight to the point. I'm going to kill him. Did you perceive how he laughed at his vice? So Iago does nothing to dampen this sense of violent savagery. He merely encourages it. Did you see how he laughed at his vice? He not only committed this sinful act, notice him using this language again of virtue and vice, he laughed at it. He didn't even think that virtue was something worth committing to. And did you see the handkerchief? There they are, the two ways of interpreting reality, the supposed tangible, concrete proof of reality, of honesty in the sense of truth, and vice, the language of abstraction. He laughed at that, but you were given the real proof. This is the way to see reality. What you see in front of you is real now, not understanding everything through the lens of virtue and vice. And then he establishes a similar contrast here. Was that mine? Yours by this hand, and to see how he prizes the foolish woman your wife. She gave it him, and he hath given it his whore. What we have in that verbal construction is this degeneration. Your wife is foolish. She gave it to this man, who is herself beneath your wife in the social hierarchy. This man who is beneath your wife gave it to a whore. Your entire relationship is threatening to unravel the social fabric of Venice through the degeneration of rank. It's falling apart. Othello's mental instability is something that comes to the fore as we go further and further through this scene. I let her rot and perish and be damned tonight, for she shall not live. No, my heart is turned to stone. I strike it and it hurts my hand. Oh, the world hath not a sweeter creature. In the space of 2 lines, he is committed to murdering her and then used hyperbole to celebrate her sweetness, her inescapable beauty, and her inescapable virtue. So we've got here, in that line, a sense of his instability. His contradictory language in ethical terms reveals this sense of instability, that she can rot and perish and be damned, and yet the world hath not a sweeter creature. He still has no ability to navigate the ambiguities of the situation, because he's just jumping from this vision of seeing her as corrupt and tainted, and then flipping to the opposite. He can't tolerate any understanding of Desdemona that isn't one of his idealized abstractions. If she is not perfect, I want to kill her. And this is the danger of a fundamentalist of some description. When someone holds the world up to clear, idealized categories, anytime something interferes with them, everything is at stake. And that's the danger of any kind of ideological fundamentalist. Othello says, hang her, I do but say what she is, so delicate with her needle, an admirable musician. Oh, she will sing the savageness out of a bear, of so high and plenteous wit and invention. So through this kind of waxing lyrical about all of her strengths, he manages to be self-referential here. She will sing the savageness out of a bear. And there is within that, I think, a self-referential suggestion about the way in which their relationship has been the path to social legitimacy for him. She has sung his savageness out of him. She has taken his wild barbarian streak away.